Is it time to dismantle some doctrines? If you don't know what that means, then come along with me. I'm Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Bible college teacher and pastor of more than 20 years. Join me as we deconstruct whatever dogmas and beliefs have held you behind, and together work to reconstruct and rebuild your authentic self. Welcome back, Chris Shelton, to the Dismantling Doctrine podcast. It's been a hot minute.
Yes, it has. Yeah, we did a show a couple weeks ago, but I haven't been over on your side in a while, so this is fun.
That's what I was going to say. It's been crazy, and it was funny because as we were trying to boot up and get this thing going, you were having all kinds of camera problems, and it seems like every time we record, either I have a problem or you have a problem, and I always say, as an evangelical, when I was an evangelical, everything had to have an explanation. It would have been demonic activity trying to stop this conversation. Satan doesn't want us to have this conversation. So I had to say, yes, it's spiritual warfare, Chris, clearly.
That's right. Obviously.
Yeah,
It would have, and if this kind of thing happened more routinely, I would wonder if Osa was tapping my lines or something, some Scientology.
Get out the tinfoil hat. I was going to say, when you were a Scientologist, when stuff like this happened, how would you have responded?
In absolutely that way.
It wasn't spiritual warfare, but it was something else.
That's right. That's right. Suppression.
Yeah. Everything has to have an explanation. Well, now on your show the other week, and we need to mention that because we got pretty in depth on Project 2025. Yet again, we've been talking about this for, almost a year. It's crazy. Coming up around July, August of last year, you and I were talking about Project 2025. So we did a show on your, speaking of cults podcast. What can you tell us about Project 2025, just kind of in a nutshell? Because we've got to go into another thing, which has just come out, which we won't tell people what that is yet. But first, we start with Project 2025.
Yeah, that is the framework, the architectural layout or plan of what this administration is doing. I mean, Heritage Foundation is a think tank operation in Washington, D.C., headed by some of the worst people you will ever hear or learn about. And they are Christian nationalists for the most part. And that Project 2025 specifically is a theocratically minded, quiet or soft revolution of the American system to turn it into a religious theocracy. And if that sounds crazy to you, it's because it is crazy, but I'm not lying to you and I'm not exaggerating. That is what Project 2025 is.
That's a good explanation, a good overview of in a nutshell what it is. And what we said, what hit me the other day when we were doing your show, the blizzard of executive orders that Trump started literally on day one of his taking office, that we found out was by design. It was no accident. And he enacted a huge number of Project 2025.
That's right. It's the blitzkrieg, so to speak.
Yeah. It was just a blizzard, whatever metaphor you want to use. And it was by design. And a lot of those executive orders were straight out of the Project 2025 playbook, which is called the Mandate for Leadership. It's about a 900 or 1,000-page document that was written in the run-up to the election. And this was their guideline, their playbook for the next quote-unquote conservative president, which turned out to be Trump, of course. And he has just hit the ground running on day one, and it's gone so fast, the courts can't keep up. The law, he's running roughshod over the law, now to the point where he's ignoring the Supreme Court in the matter of deporting quote-unquote illegal immigrants and all the rest of it. So when does it stop? Who can stop him? This is now the question.
That's right. And it really comes down to our systems being tested to their limit right now here in the States. Every single one of our systems is being dismantled right in front of our eyes. And we're watching the dismantling of the United States, right? As a system and as a world power. I mean, Trump is absolutely destroying our reputation, our credibility, and our economic standing in the world. There have been a lot of things building for a long time that have sort of contributed to this, but now that it's sort of in their end game, because that is kind of where we're at right now, is this is collapse time. This is when things really corrosively just start falling apart. And this is a stage of history. We can look at this in lots and lots of different ways. This happens to governments all the time. It's not unique to the U.S. government. We just happen to be living in the time when it's happening. And it sucks. it really, really sucks to watch it happen. So we need to do everything we can to mobilize, organize, and figure out how to fight back, because we can't do it as individuals. Just forget that. There's no podcast, there's no news show, there's no individual who's going to stop or turn this tide or change this. We have got to organize and work together. And maybe that's messaging for the end of the show, but it is the answer to the question of what do we do? Who can stop them? Well, we can. As a citizenry, we have the power to do it, but we need to get busy doing it, not just sitting on our screens watching it happen, you know?
I think so. Yeah, that's absolutely true. We said that, oh, it can't happen here.
Oh,
But it's just happening.
yeah,
It
is happening.
the parallels between 1930s Germany, 1920s, 1930s Italy with Mussolini, the parallels are becoming more and more clear day by day. Trump is a wannabe authoritarian fascist. He's talking about doing away with, term limits as a president, all the rest of it. Ha ha ha. Oh, I'm only joking, only joking. Yeah, is he though? What's going to happen
No, he's not.
when this term ends? Is he just going to go, you know what? We're just going to rewrite the rule book and throw it all out. And again, who is going to stop it?
Exactly. Well, we are.
We're
We're the only ones who have the chance of doing it. Let's put it that way. And when I say we, again, I mean organized activity, right? All of us getting together and doing it. And at the local level, that means taking out of power the representatives and congressmen who enable and empower all of this to happen. The men and women in Congress who are just letting this occur, voting for it to happen. I mean, my local congressional House representative, Gabe Evans, was the deciding vote. Well, I very much let his office know what was what, but that's only the beginning of the work I plan on doing here locally to make sure that Gabe Evans doesn't have a job in 2 years. Now, where are we going to be in 2 years? Well, we're not going to be in complete anarchy. We're not going to have a complete collapse of the United States in 2 years. Okay, so we've got time to deal with this, but we've got to act. Find out who your local representatives are. Find out who your congressmen are. Find out who your state and your local people are, because those are the people who are doing all of this. So, and they are the ones who, when they're not the ones doing it, they're the ones who can stop it. So we've got to empower those people and find more of those kind of people to put in those positions to turn this thing around, right? I mean, it's really no different than what the Republicans did, when years and years of left-wing power, and they organized and set things up and got things going so that they could have things their way. Well, their way is insane. So if we're going to turn it around and not have a Christian fascist nation, then we've got to use the levers and tools of power we have available to us. Otherwise, it really will just fall into complete anarchy. That's, again, just history. It's not because I'm a doomer. It's just, if we don't act, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to get rolled over. Exactly. So we need to act. That's my message. My main message is get busy out there. The time for sitting around watching the news is over. It's time to get up and start making news.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we mentioned that. Get involved in the protests in your city, your town, whatever. That's another way. People are turning out into the streets literally with signs and everything else. Well, you mentioned Christian nationalism. I wanted to touch base on that because this is something I've realized probably in the last year or so, and that is that Christian nationalism is fundamentally anti-democratic. And you could prove that by looking no further than the Roe versus Wade decision. The majority of Americans were against overturning Roe versus Wade. The majority of Americans did not want that to happen. And yet, because it was driven by Christian nationalism, a desire to return America to a, quote, Christian nation, it was a national corporate sin. Abortion, this is how they viewed it. And they said, we're going to make it illegal again. And that is exactly what they did. And they're not content with that because, of course, you mentioned Project 2025. They want to take even more draconian steps to make any sort of abortion illegal. And so this is Christian nationalism in its fundamentally anti-democratic iteration. This is what it's doing. Even though the majority of Americans didn't want it, it still happened. That's anti-democratic. The minority somehow got it through. And we know how that happened. Trump's obviously appointing the last 3 Supreme Court justices, blah, blah, blah. That's an old story now, but they won. They absolutely won. And they're not content with that. Now they're going after LGBTQ rights, trans rights, same-sex marriage, all the rest of it. That's the next thing on the chopping block.
Yep, that's right. And they're going in really hard on the immigration issues, right? I mean, that's where the real civil rights and human rights violations are happening on a daily here in the United States right now, is masked government thugs are running around this country, literally disappearing people right in front of everybody else. No one knows who these thugs are. They are the modern American Gestapo. No question about it. That is not too strong a word for who these people are. They are hiding in plain sight. They will not reveal who they are. These are not patriots. These are not Americans. They are thugs. And they've been empowered by a narcissistic, crazy person, right? In the name of Donald Trump and his administration. So the Christian nationalist component of this, we've been talking about for a long time with Project 2025. And more recently, we talked about the America First Policy Institute. The America First Initiative is a phrasing that is a sort of catchphrasing for these guys, for these people and their movement. It's all about America First. It's incredibly culty. These people are absolutely convinced of the rightness of their position, and they will not allow any democratic norms to get in their way. That's their attitude, is people are wrong. They are immoral. They are ungodly, and they must be converted. And they must be converted forcefully, because clearly they don't want to be converted voluntarily. And that's where Project 2025 comes out of. Now, America First and the America First Policy Institute and some of these other groups are not religious extremists. They're operating on a whole different platform. But there's a Venn diagram of overlap with these people, because this is how power is being distributed in Washington, D.C. right now. And we can say that very, very like with certainty, because the America First Policy Institute, which is completely closely tied in with and overlaps with Project 2025 and Heritage Foundation, this is the group that is supplying the personnel and the policies, and as you said, the executive orders. All of it is springing out of these groups. They are engaged in a soft, nonviolent, revolution to destroy our government and put their own vision of America there. And they don't care what anyone else thinks about it. Just like cult members, they are extremists in their point of view. And as we see with ICE, the American Gestapo, they are willing to use violence to enact their policies. They don't care. And they are disappearing people to other countries, which apparently we're paying. This is human rights. There is no way to justify what they're doing, but they're justifying it anyway. And I don't know how many people believe in what they're doing. I don't know that it matters. It's happening. So it really just needs to be stopped. The psychology of it and the intention behind it, there's a certain point where that ceases to matter. I understand who these people are. You do too. We've been talking about them for years.
Yep.
Understanding them doesn't stop them, right? There's a certain point where you simply have to erect a wall and not let them do what they're doing. And we're pretty far past that point right now. So we got a lot of running to do to catch up to all the years of sitting on our asses, watching these people do what they do and not doing anything to stop them. Now we're at the point where they're willing to roll over the Constitution. They don't, and the Constitution's toilet paper to these people. They don't care. What they care about is their idea of how things should be. And their idea is an incredibly delusional idea. I mean, we're talking about people like Peter Navarro, Trump's main financial advisor, as far as I can tell, a person who has no idea what he's doing, has theories of economics and tariffs that are actually kindergarten level stupid. But this is what's rolling forward. And why? Because Trump doesn't understand the world. And he doesn't need to. He doesn't have any need to understand the world. His world is what he wants. If it whimsically appears in his, view screen, there it is. I want it, right? Or I don't want it. I want it punished, right? Like Harvard right now with, okay, I'm going to take away all your foreign international students. That is 3-year-old maturity. That's 3-year-old mentality writ large. It's exactly like I talked about in our America First podcast. It's that Twilight Zone episode, the kid.
I was thinking about that because the Simpsons did a Halloween special on that. Remember that one where Bart had the superpowers? They did a similar thing, and you could read everyone's mind, and They were trying to kill him, but they couldn't because he knew what was going to happen. Yes. Exactly the toddler that everyone's terrified of, and for good reason.
Exactly. It's like
Wasn't
that
amazing.
mentality and the maturity level is like that.
Yeah, an all powerful.
Well, I'm sorry, what was that?
9-year-old, who everyone is rightfully afraid of, who does have all the power, but yet their maturity level is,
That's
they
so
shouldn't have that power.
So because he's emotionally immature, and because yeah, exactly, because he's emotionally mature, and because he doesn't understand the world. There are a lot of Americans who have a very, very wrong idea about Donald Trump and how he interacts with the world, right? Because they project themselves onto him, and they shouldn't. Donald Trump is in a headspace that is very unique. It's a very rare place to be, with his megalomania, his dementia, his narcissism, and the other personality disorders that he has. He's a combination of things that totals into a massive ego man-child. That's one way of putting it. So when you give him intelligence briefings, right, he has to practically have color in the lines, kind of simplistic explanations for things. So people around him, yeah. So the people around him have to sort of slide stuff up to him and present it to him in such a way that it will show how it will aggrandize him. He doesn't care about anything else. And I mean that literally. He doesn't care about anything but what he thinks makes him look powerful. And he craves his narcissistic supply comes from those moments when he can lord his power over others and hurt them.
Yeah,
That's what Trump finds pleasure in.
Well, I mean, we said this before. There was an article that came out, and someone who was on the campaign trail in 2015 with Trump, and when he was being laughed at by all the other the people who really, on paper should have gotten the nomination, and he basically turned to this guy and said, "One day, essentially, they're going to be bowing and scraping to me, and I'm going to love it when that happens." And this is exactly what has happened. Now they're all bowing and scraping, and he's loving it. Well, I was going to say, you went talking about the guardrails, because I remember we talked about this in the first Trump era. We kept saying, a lot of people were saying, can the guardrails hold? And they kind of did. I mean, he got impeached twice, but not really, because obviously the Republican Senate just voted him through. But the fact is that couldn't happen now. Now, what guardrails are left? They're dismantling the guardrails. That was the difference.
Well, that's exactly where we are facing our
the crisis.
Well, that's why we're facing our constitutional crisis. That's right. That the reason we're facing a constitutional crisis. Let's be really super clear right now. Trump is a phenomenon, and he is there's so many words that could be used. I could just break out my thesaurus. I mean, all day I could just go on about what a mutinous traitor, scumbag, horrible person he is, right? But that's counted for within our system as long as the other two branches do their job. And right now, the biggest problem that we're facing, and the reason we're in a constitutional crisis where our country is burning to the ground, is because the support systems that keep it in place, i.e. the Supreme Court and Congress, are both corrupt and compromised almost beyond recognition. And that's the real problem here. Half of Congress, the senators, the Republican Party, the GOP, is a completely mutinous party. They have given up on and broken their oaths of office hundreds of times. Not one Republican congressman or woman is worthy of their title at this point in the House and Senate. And I don't just say that over policy disagreements. I'm talking about constitutional points. I'm talking about human rights issues that they are enabling to happen. Congress could put a stop to every single thing Trump is doing if they had the will to. But Mike Johnson in the House and whoever the fuck is running in the Senate just give Trump a golden ticket, a free pass on everything he wants. And this is where we are falling. This is how our system is failing us, which is why we need to be pounding down the doors of our congressmen and women right? I'm just going to say congressman, but you get what I mean, right? That's our contact point and pressure point, because we have no power to contact or do anything with Donald Trump. And if you could spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 hours, 5 hours with Donald Trump, it would be an utter waste of your time. There is nothing to be done with Donald Trump. He's a crazy, demented fool who belongs in an institution.
Well, he certainly belonged to prison.
He's
a convicted criminal, Chris. I mean,
institution too.
yeah, he literally.
So have crazy at the top when you have a Nero, right? We have these other two branches, right? And this is where we are being failed. This is where this is how we're being failed, right? Is it's not just a bunch of fucking nutters voted a nutter into the office, but now we have the structures of government so compromised. And this has been the product of decades and decades of work that we have been talking about, right? In terms of how did this happen? Well, the Congress didn't just roll over one day or take some sit or something. I mean, this has been years and years and years in the making to get these people into positions of power. Mike Johnson is probably one of the most powerful Christian nationalists in the United States at this point, if not the most powerful, because he's the head of the majority of the House of Representatives. And he's a complete religious fanatic.
He is.
I mean, fanatic.
Is not too.
I know I'm using a lot of strong words today, but I want to be clear that I mean every single one of them at the level that I'm expressing them. Right? I'm not engaging in hyperbole today when I'm throwing these really extreme words around, right? This is the place we're at. And if we don't call it what it is, we're never going to deal with it.
It's true. Yeah, he is the most powerful. And I read a quote the other day by Michael Ferris, who he is another big name in Christian right circles. He started the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. He started Patrick Henry College. He also was the head of the ADF, which is the largest Christian legal defense fund in America. He's not anymore, but he's a major mover and shaker. And he basically commented about Mike Johnson. He said, that guy, what you just said, is the most powerful Christian in politics today. And I couldn't be happier about it. I couldn't be more pleased. Clearly, God has put Mike Johnson into that position. That's what Michael Ferris said. And I was going to go back to one thing he said. Now, he said Trump doesn't care about anything or anybody, but there's another aspect to this, and that is, maybe we're getting off the topic, but he is absolutely concerned about his financial bottom line, because right now, he did this when he was president the first time. He used the office to line his own pockets. That much is clear. Now, though, it's like a whole nother level. I was watching a thing with
it's beyond.
Yeah.
It's beyond. I mean, the whole Air Force One fiasco. He opened
sure. I mean, and he doing deals all over the Middle East to benefit his family's business and all the rest of it. I was watching a thing on YouTube where Adam Schiff was going through the top 10 Trump corruption, sort of things that any other president would get them, impeached and scandalized. Not with Trump, not with the Republicans in charge. He just went down the list, and it's like, what about this one? What about that? What about that? Nobody cares right now. Certainly not the Republicans. Because as you say, they're either spineless or they're in the cult of Trump. They're so afraid of his base. I mean, I think over the years, Trump has bent the Republican Party to his will. It's his party now, as in he is running the party, and they are deathly afraid of his base. They're afraid of how much they could destroy somebody. So if you speak up, there's the dispensing of existence. There's the cult psychology aspect. You're gone. You might finish out your term, but you will never come back. If Trump denounces you, the dear leader says you're a pariah, you're done.
That's right. That's why we bring in the cult models. We understand. It's not that Trump is leading some religious rituals in the basement of the White House or something, or he lords his power over people by, being some, well, he does actually. It was.
Say, wait a minute, what are you talking about?
If you watch his meetings, but
yeah, he does it in different ways. He's not like a general.
That more in sort of like, the sort of guru.
Yeah, classic cult leader.
People are not hanging on every word of Trump's wisdom, right? They are, but the structures of power around him and control are very culty.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a danger, and we talked about that on your show. The insane loyalty that the Trumpists have, even though they're watching their own retirement funds go down. They're watching prices go up at their beloved Walmart and Target and Home Depot and everywhere else because of the Trump tariffs, and they're losing their jobs. I mean, I've heard, how many stories have we heard? Veterans who voted for Trump not once, not twice, 3 times, who worked for the VA, let's say, lost their job because of Elon Musk and Doge, and they're like, "What the hell? I voted for the guy. This wasn't supposed to happen to me. This is bullshit." And it's like, well, yeah, what do you think he was going to do? He told you what he was going to do. So you voted for him anyway, fool, and you're still loyal to him. That's insane.
Actually, make it a little. Let me make it a little worse.
Can it get worse?
It can.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right that a loyal following, and Trump really values loyalty. He really talks about that a lot. Okay, psychologically speaking, right, perception-wise and everything, we are on very safe ground when we say that people who are in a cult headspace or an extreme headspace of belief alter their perception of reality to fit their beliefs. They don't alter their beliefs to fit reality. It's the other way around. Every human being does this, but people who are in an extreme headspace do it in a way that is open, like it's disturbing, because they will deny a thing that is literally right in front of their face and say it's not there, or it's not true, or it's not real, or something. Alternately, they will say there are things that exist, like Trump's truthism. The idea that Trump tells the truth is a complete fantasy. The man does not know how to do that. And yet they believe that everything he says is true, right? Like that kind of a delusory reality is where Trump's cult base sits. And there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who are in Trump's support group. You have a large group of people who support Trump for a lot of different reasons. And a good sized chunk of that group of people are mindless automatons who will do and follow anything he says because they've given over their own personality and identity to the Trump movement. That's what it is to be in a cult, and that's what the cult part of the Trump movement is. But it's not all there is to it. I don't think about the people who are running Project 2025 or the people who are running the America First Palestine Institute are not in that cult of Trump. They don't go home to yard signs and bumper stickers and flags and posters. None of that is regaling their front lawns, right? They know exactly what they're doing. The cultists are in a world of delusion, and I can't stress that word enough. It's delusion. They don't see reality. However, one of the impulses or purposes for them doing what they're doing should be commented on, and that is there's a certain contingent of this group, at least, if not the majority of them, who don't imagine that their lives are going to get better. They've already kind of given up on that part of existence. They're not in it to become rich and powerful. They're not millionaires in the waiting. They know that's not what their future is. But they're so consumed by their hatred of their fellow Americans who they have been indoctrinated to believe are evil and counter-Christian and satanic and all the rest, all these labels that the Christian pastors have been pounding on these people for decades. We come to a place now where as long as those people, as long the Trumpists feel that as I'm suffering and my life is going to suck, but I want their lives and their emotion, I want them to suffer more. And as long as they're suffering more than me, I can be happy. It's such a degraded headspace, you know what I mean? It's such a twisted place to be. And that's where a lot of Trump's base is, which is why they take so much satisfaction in the way he hurts minorities and the intellectuals and academia. They hate those institutions with a passion. They hate them because they think they're counter-Christian or satanic or hotbeds of misinformation and deviant sexuality and all these weird ideas they have out of these bizarre interpretations of the Bible that they run with. And these aren't just little enclaves anymore, right? This is like large swaths of the American population have fallen into this way of thinking. So they just want other people to suffer more than they're suffering. And that motivation has to be amongst one of the worst motivations for a citizenry to feel in history, because that means they've given up on everything and anything goes. Anything goes. It's okay as long as they're hurting more than I'm hurting.
Yeah, which is
You know, you can't reason with people like that. You can't
exactly.
argue with them. You can't present some facts to them and pretend that that's going to change their mind, because it won't. It requires a full-blown intervention one-on-one to deal with people like that. And we don't have any resources for that. And nobody out there on social media is going to get that job done, because it doesn't get done on social media.
No, it's a big extra.
It's an in-person thing. So I don't want to just find that part of the problem too, right? It's like we have the high level problem with the people in charge, and then we have this lower level problem with the people who are making this happen, who want this to happen, and their motivations for doing so. It's vengeance and vindictiveness and pure cult extremism. That's a horrible place to be.
It is a horrible place to be. We're coming right back in just a few minutes of the second half of this conversation, all about the cult of Trump and Project Esther. And in fact, when we come back in the second half, we're going to really take a deep dive into this Project Esther. This is something that's a hugely concerning thing. The story has just come out recently in the New York Times. It's now being picked up in some other media outlets. This is really a blending of Project 2025 and this new initiative, Project Esther, which we're going to explain in a few minutes. But what we're seeing is the degradation, the dismantling of democratic norms in America. It's really unconstitutional, a lot of the stuff that Trump is doing. But this is all fueled, of course, by the playbook of things like Project 2025, the America First Policy Institute, and now, as we're going to see, Project Esther, which is a whole new concerning development. And depending on how this works, I might just do a standalone episode on Project Esther to really take an even deeper dive. I've done a lot of research on this, and there's more to the story that's come out even since Chris and I talked just a few days ago. So maybe stay tuned for that. I will mention what's coming up here. The next episode, I've had to push this one in there because of the breaking news cycle. The next episode coming up is a conversation with Lucas Wilson. He's got a book called Shame, Sex, Attraction. It's all about surviving conversion therapy. And this is something that he himself experienced personally when he was a student at Liberty University in Virginia. And the book also tells stories of other people who had similar experiences in this so-called conversion therapy. And of course, if you don't know what that means, essentially, in a nutshell, it's the idea that God wants to and can make you, quote unquote, straight. If you're a gay person, you have to become straight, and God will do that for you. And it involves a lot of Christian counseling and therapy that's really messed up. And we're going to hear in detail what it's like to go through conversion therapy. This is Lucas's own story, just a fascinating conversation. And then I've got a call booked with Stephen Mather. He's been on the show before, along with his daughter. This is maybe a couple of years ago. He did a show with her called The Cult Hackers. He's doing a lot of different things now. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through Dr. Robert J. Lifton's 8 markers of cults. We're going to compare stories, him being an ex-Jehovah's Witness and me being an ex-evangelical. We're going to talk about the similarities and differences between the two religions. And then we're going to talk about recovering from the damaging effects of religion, both in his case as an ex-JW and me as an ex-evangelical, and again, compare stories. I'm really looking forward to connecting again with Stephen Mather. And then finally, the last couple things, I'll mention my book, Not So Shiny, Not So Happy People. Is going to be coming out very soon on Audible. This is the narrated version that I myself did. So I'm working with Tim Sledge, my editor, getting this out hopefully in the month of June. This is sort of our target date, so we're going to see. But I will let everyone know, and I think I'll probably do another episode where I read another couple of chapters from the book and sort of give you an idea of what the whole thing is about. And then finally, if you want to become a member of the Patreon community for the Dismantling Doctrine podcast, you get access to great calls. We just did a call the other day with returning guest Regina Cates. We had a really good conversation for about an hour. We're taking a break now for the summer, but we're going to be starting these back up again in September. So that is a really good benefit you get for being a Patreon supporter of the show. You get access to these calls that we do once a month. Just a great way to meet returning guests, get to know them, chat with them for about an hour, and get to pick their brains about issues and topics that we discussed in our podcast episode. So that is a great benefit, as I say. And if you want to become a member of the Patreon community, the links to that, as always, are in the show notes. All right, let's get on back into the second half of this chat with Chris Shelton as we continue to unpack this issue for you, talking about the cult of Trump and how that relates to this thing called Project Esther. That might be a good segue into the other half, what we were talking about, because you said earlier, okay, who's supporting Trump? Who's supporting this crackdown on immigration? Well, I saw the cult rallies, the Trump rallies, people waving signs, stop illegal immigration and close the borders. They were waving signs, chanting and cheering him on every time he said anything inflammatory about, illegal aliens murdering people and raping people and these horrible people, and they're taking your jobs and all the rest of it. Okay, so now, just over this weekend, as we're doing this recording now, the New York Times broke this story about this thing called Project Esther, because this is something that's been in the news, but we didn't know the linkages behind it. The deportation, arresting people, foreign students who dared to take part in a pro-Palestine march or demonstration. These people are getting arrested. Now, we just thought, okay, that was just part of the Trump crackdown on immigration. But as we found out, there's a thing called Project Esther, which is the brainchild of our good old friends over there at the Heritage Foundation. And actually,
Right.
this is the motivation behind, they say, oh, it's to combat anti-Semitism. But the truth is, it's a crackdown on free speech. It's a crackdown on due process. And it's another authoritarian move. So what do we know about Project Esther? Because we've done a lot of research on this. We've read a lot of stuff in the run-up to this podcast.
Yeah, let's talk about this. This is good. Because this is a sub, you could say, if you look at Project 2025 or America First stuff as sort of the umbrella policy push, right? Let's change as much as we can, as quickly as we can, in as many places as we can with this blitzkrieg, right, of executive orders and DOJ and all the rest. If you look at that whole picture, Project Esther is one part of this, and it's the part that focuses specifically on anti-Semitism. Now, this is just a label that is being used. It's a loaded language issue where this is not about anti-Semitism. This is about using anti-Semitism to enact controls and strip rights away from a segment of the population, that we can get this other segment, the Trump loyalists, hate these people, so they're going to support this. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the Gaza conflict as an excuse to strip rights away from people, specifically foreign students, people at like Harvard is being targeted specifically right now. But it's a broad America-wide net that they're throwing to use anti-Semitism as an excuse to imprison people, deport people, or worse. The kicker, the way you know that what I just said is true, is because it's a series of policies that are and enforcement to come down on anybody who is pro-Palestine, who's uttering or saying things that are somehow anti-Israel, pro-Palestine. If you have anything to say that could be interpreted in that way, your head is on the chopping block for anti-Semitism. Now, saying, I don't want children to be bombed and murdered in Gaza is not an anti-Semitic statement. It's a statement of humanity and compassion. I don't want children dying for no good reason and for reasons that they would never even understand. They're children. They have nothing in this. And yet they are one of the major casualties of this entire conflict on both sides. And it's been that way for decades now. We have to, my position about that conflict, just to get this out of the way, is both sides are wrong. The whole thing is disgusting. It's a disgusting mess, and it has been for a very long time, over 100 years. There's no easy solution to it, but we don't have to take sides in a struggle where both sides are committing human rights atrocities. We don't have to take sides. You don't have to do that. You don't have to be binary in your thinking about it. You can look at the whole thing and go, this is whack. And then to see one side right now at this current period of time, because we can go back in history and look at how both sides have very, very thoroughly done atrocious things to each other. And right now we're dealing with Israel, having the upper hand and being very vicious in their attacks. And this mostly, as far as I can tell, falls on Netanyahu in the same way that we have a Trump problem, they have a Netanyahu problem. So that's the extent of what I'm going to comment on about that conflict and where this supposedly is coming out of. But You don't support or deal with a conflict like that by taking sides, as America's government has now done, and saying half of this issue is absolutely positively not to be discussed or talked about, and you have no right to support anything other than the side we say you get to support, and you don't get to use any language other than the language we say you get to use. That's what they're doing right now with Project Esther. That's what Project Esther is all about, is shutting down, using this as an excuse to shut down any protests or conflicts pushing back on our allyship with Israel.
Without saying,
Because we shouldn't be allied with Israel the way we are right now. Israel's doing horrible things. We really need a whole like moral reset on a lot of this stuff in terms of our foreign relations. But I ain't in charge of that, right? And that's not really the problem with Project Esther. Right. I only wanted to say all that stuff to kind of get it out of the way. But Project Esther really isn't about that. It's about taking away your rights and using that conflict as an excuse to do so. And I hope we're clear about that, because this is classic totalitarian tactics 101, right? This is exactly how it happens. Mussolini did the same things. Hitler did the same things. Xi is doing the same things.
yes, Stalin did.
And you can find examples of this all over the world right now. You don't have to go to history. This is a tactic, and it's a crafted, purposeful tactic, right? It's misdirection. It's, well, we want everybody. You don't want genocide, right? No, I don't want genocide. Good, then we need to shut these people down and kick them out of the country. Wait a minute.
Without due process.
Yeah, no due process. Forget that, right? We're going to have we're going to have the American Gestapo go around these people up, right?
The NCABD, the KGB, the three. Same
Is
thing.
actually becoming an enforcement arm for anything the Trump administration wants. It's not just about deporting foreign, illegal people who shouldn't be here. It's about enacting authoritarian or totalitarian controls.
That's it. And they're doing it in a way that, like, under the guise of anti-Semitism, because you could say, to most people, unless you're a neo-Nazi or a white supremacist or member of the KKK, do you support anti-Semitism? Most people would say, well, of course not. I mean, I don't want to be anti-Semitic. No one wants to be anti-Semitic unless you're a racist or a Nazi. And then you say, okay, great. So if you go to a pro-Palestine rally or an anti-Israel, you want to demonstrate, hey, I think this is wrong what they're doing. You are not only anti-Semitic, but you're also supporting Hamas. So it goes even one step beyond being labeled, you're supporting a terrorist network. So you basically are a terrorist yourself. And you're wait a minute, I just went to a protest. How does that make me A, anti-Semitic, and B, a supporter of Hamas, a terrorist network, and therefore, able to be arrested by plainclothes policemen who we don't know who they are and deported without due process? And that's just the start, as you say, because it's the whole thing about that poem. First, they came for the and I said nothing because it wasn't my problem. I wasn't a trade unionist. I wasn't a this. I wasn't a Jew. Then when they came for me, there was no one left to stop them because they'd arrested everybody else. And I never said anything when they did it to everybody else. Well, it wasn't my problem. And that's the scary part. That poem is coming true. The Niemoller poem, it's happening right before our eyes. And the other interesting thing, what tells you that it is bullshit, is that it's under the guise of anti-Semitism. But what we find out is, A, no American Jewish organization has signed on to Project Esther. And B, who was it written by? Guess who? Well, we know Heritage, but it was written, these are Christian Zionists. These are Christians who see themselves as inextricably tied, America tied to the future of Israel. And it's a Christian Zionist movement. It's not a Jewish thing. Because you go, okay, if it's about anti-Semitism, then you must have a number of Jewish organizations that agree with it, and not a single one, except for one. I found this really ultra-Orthodox Jewish rabbinical foundation that is part of Project, or they agree with Project Esther, but they're almost like a Jewish Christian nationalist organization. It's very strange, a fringe group. But no mainline Jewish organization has signed on to Project Esther, and they're saying, no, we don't want to have anything to do with it because it's clearly a Christian Zionist thing, and it's a violation of your human rights. That's really what it's about, cloaked in the guise of anti-Semitism.
Well, that's exactly right. And there's a darker layer to that as well, which let's go ahead and go there, because why not, right? We've talked about it before, but let's really go there for a second. And that is, you mentioned Christian Zionism. This goes to really disturbing places. What is Christian Zionism?
What is it? Okay, it's the belief that Israel, the nation of Israel, has a right to possess their land. And the uniquely American slant on it is saying America must support Israel unilaterally, unconditionally, no matter what they do. We have to. And that's rooted in what they view as biblical prophecy, because the Bible says anyone who blesses Israel, God will bless that nation. And so this Christian Zionism is fueled by this desire that if we honor Israel, if we support Israel, if we bless Israel, quote unquote, God will bless America by extension. And of course, this is also tied into end times eschatology, the view of the end of the world. Jesus is going to return. The Jews are going to be saved. And there's going to be this amazing end of days apocalyptic scenario. And that only can happen when Israel is in that land, ethnic Jews in the land of Israel. So they are absolutely vested in keeping Israel where they are and supporting them blindly. And that's essentially what Christian Zionism is.
That's right. And that's the motivation. See, when you look at a Mike Johnson, when you look at Paula White, Trump's, one of Trump's religious advisors, right? When you look at these religious extremists and what are they whispering in Trump's ear, or what are they thinking? What are they thinking? What do they want? They want to hasten end times.
Yeah.
They want to achieve, the glory of God as they see it. Again, I mentioned delusional, right? Like, we're talking about people who think, okay, yeah, Netanyahu, genocide, killing babies, destroying things. 2 thumbs up, because we support Israel 100%, no questions asked. We have to, because whoever blesses Israel, it will be blessed. And therefore, it's kindergarten level thinking in its simplicity. Global international affairs are not kindergarten in their simplicity. They are incredibly complicated issues, but not to these people. Not to these people. And that's kind of the point. They're simple Simon thinkers. They believe God's got it all worked out. And so they just have to do what they think God wants, and we're good. And if that means stripping the rights away from a bunch of foreigners and immigrants and people here in this country who aren't American, get them out of here, right? I mean, this is every ism, racism, sex, I mean, all of it to the nth degree, right? To an exponential degree. So you can't, again, this is, I say all this only to stress, this is not something that can be reasoned with or argued with, or you can present some facts and it's, oh, right, of course. It ain't like that with these folks. They are caught up in religious mania, and they happen to be, then you don't have to have, here's the other, like, really horrible little truth about this is, you don't have to have a lot of people on board with this when you start talking about levels like DC, Washington, D.C., right? Like, it doesn't have to be a lot of people in order to have a huge impact. But unfortunately, they've been stacking the Congress for a while now, and the courts.
And the court.
And various things, right? So we do have a problem with this. The other thing I wanted to say about Esther, about Project Esther, was you brought up the point about the neo-Nazis and the right-wing anti-Semitists. They're not being gone after.
Exactly.
At all.
Crickets.
As part of this. Nothing.
The most blatant target.
Didn't they, you had a quote in there, right? Didn't they specifically say, well, yeah, but neo-Nazis aren't part of conservatism or something? What was that line they had?
That's what it was. I'm trying to find it now, but basically, yeah, they say nothing about known anti-Semites. I mean, it's like, why don't you go after the Ku Klux Klan? Why don't you go after the neo-Nazis? It's like, well, crickets on that. And someone said something about that. Yeah, well, the reason we don't worry about that, he said, here it is. James Carafano, the head of Heritage's anti-Semitism operations, stated that, quote, white supremacists are not my problem because white supremacists are not part of being conservative. I mean,
you believe that?
It ain't my problem. And this is a guy who works for Heritage, man.
Yeah, he's the guy who's in charge of the anti-Semitism initiative, right? So this is a guy who, like, when he says, yeah, we don't care about all those right-wing anti-Semitists, right? Of course they don't, because it's not about that. It's about targeting a specific demographics and using the concept of anti-Semitism as an excuse.
Exactly. As a cudgel.
Right? That's it. That's all that's going on here.
That's what gives it the lie. I think that issue alone, the more I thought about it, because when I first read that, it was in the Times article, I thought it ignores anti-Semitism, clear anti. And I don't understand that. But the more I researched it, I thought, I think I understand. The fact is, yeah, if they're going to go after anybody, go after the neo-Nazis, go after the people who are chanting "Jews will not replace us" as they march through Charlottesville. I mean, that's the clearest case of anti-Semitism. Why are they going after some foreign student who joins a protest march at his or her university against Israel or pro-Palestine? That person's going to get deported and arrested, and they've never said an anti-Semitic thing in their life, but they're labeled a terrorist and an anti. What's happening here? But that's what gives the lie to the whole thing. They don't care about real anti-Semites. It's about tamping down on free speech. It's about tamping down on the quote unquote woke liberal left who dares to speak out against the genocide in Gaza. And that's really what this is about. And as you say, it's a first step toward authoritarianism. If they can do that, then who's to say they're not going to come after you and me next?
Well, they will, and here's exactly how. And let me be clear about this, because this is buried in Esther, and it's a really, it's actually the most important part about it, as far as I'm concerned. There are two other little bits in this, which is that they, and we mentioned already, they claim that there is this thing called the Hamas Support Network.
Yeah, HSN.
And then they claim that there's this other affiliated group. What's one?
They say there are HSN and HSO. Hamas Support Network, yes, Hamas support organizations, and these are global terrorist networks. So if you participate in a march, you're a part of this Hamas support network.
This network is a fantasy.
Yeah, it doesn't exist. There is
no such thing as a global Hamas support network. This is not a formal or informal body or loose affiliation of anything. This is a made up thing. There is no such thing. And when you, and this is one of the most powerful control mechanisms that exists in all societies throughout history. When you create an invisible enemy that is everywhere and nowhere, you can put anyone in it and make the case that they are a member of it. It doesn't exist. So all you have to do is drum up a few pieces of evidence, skew the whole thing with your partisan ideology, as they are doing, right? Call something anti-Semitic when it isn't. Load the language, in other words, just like we do in cults. And you have a way of imprisoning anyone, anytime, anywhere you want.
Without due process.
And forget due process, right? And this is how due process is turned into a kangaroo court. This is how it happens, is you create an invisible enemy that is everywhere and nowhere, and anyone can be accused of being part of it. So this is going to go way beyond university students. This is going to go to professionals. This is going to go to corporate. This is going to go to entertainment industry. If they let this have legs and run with this, which they fully intend to do, unless somebody stops them, this is where they will go with it. And this will just be one of many such efforts where they will create nameless, faceless enemies that are everywhere and nowhere. And you can't fight back against that. And it creates an endless war, just like the war on drugs. The war on drugs is a complete joke. We all now understand that. If we're serious adults and we have seriously thought about the war on drugs, then we know it was a cataclysmic failure, destined to be a failure from day one, because they operated on all the wrong ideas and tried to enforce something that is not an enforceable thing. It doesn't work that way, right? You can't deal with addiction that way. But they tried, because they're Christians and they believe that if you just thump somebody hard enough and long enough, they'll change their behavior. They are very firm believers in what is in psychology, what is called conditioning. And conditioning does work, but it doesn't work the way you think it does, and it never has predictable results. It doesn't work the way people think it does. And so you can actually drive people insane and psychotic with over-conditioning. So Christians, these guys are really firm believers in this stuff, right? And so this is why this is so problematic.
Yeah. Well, another thing I was going to mention, what gives the game away is that it has received support from a lot of prominent Christian right organizations. And that's another sort of like aha moment where you go, first of all, No American Jewish network has signed or organization has signed on to it, which is a big whoa red flag. But then I started looking into these organizations. Okay, you've got the Family Research Council. This is the political arm of Dobson's Focus on the Family. These guys are anti-abortion, anti-pornography, anti-same-sex marriage, and surprise, surprise, they are part of the advisory board of Project 2025. Another one, Concerned Women for America, the Independent Women's Forum. These organizations are part of the Project 2025 advisory board, and they're
right.
supportive and giving money to Project Esther. So, this is partly why a lot of Jewish organizations are not signing on to it. A, because they tend to be more liberal and progressive themselves, but B, they're going, who's backing this thing? It's people like the Family Research Council and the Concerned Women for America. These are all anti-LGBTQ, pro-family, read pro-family meaning same-sex. No, that's not allowed. God says a man and a woman, monogamous couple, that's what a marriage is. That's what a family is. There's no room for a same-sex couple. Absolutely not. We're going to outlaw that. And so these Jewish organizations are like, I'm not climbing into bed with that. Even though in theory, wasn't this supposed to be about anti-Semitism, Chris? Well, then why aren't Jewish organizations signing to it? And they're boycotting it. They're giving it the cold shoulder. It's like, no, not going to happen.
That's right. And that's actually some of the most sensible behavior I've seen out of this that community in some time, I have to say. So I'm very happy about that they're not getting on board with this. And that they are being a little bit skeptical about it, because Christian Zionism is batshit crazy. I'm telling you, it's a sort of a doomer approach, because it's a push toward end times, right? Like, we want the world to end. And, there is a bigger picture to this too, of course, which is, this sort of the people who live in the rarefied air, right? The billionaire class who are running things. These are very rich people, by the way, just as a point. We are talking about people who are up in that 1% rarefied air, and or adjacent to it, or that kind of thing. And there's not a lot of hope at that layer. I hope people understand that the billionaires are not about saving the world. Climate change, population shrinkage, demographics, various other things all point to a future of things not being so great for us as human beings on this planet. Planet's going to be fine. It's us that are going to be suffering. And there's no any real easy solution to any of that. And so, and so they've kind of given up on, at least as far as I can tell, they've kind of given up on any idea of fixing things. There's nobody, they're not, Bill Gates is trying to fix things. It's not all of them. I don't want to paint with too broad a brush here, because that would be wrong. I've already painted with too broad a brush already. Do some of this. I admit it. I get it. Right.
Or like a paint roller, I think, or a sprayer.
A little bit. I'm trying to actually, it's a good analogy, because I'm trying to paint the big picture here.
Yeah.
You got to use a big brush, right? But to get into the details, yeah, of course, it's not all of them. But do you really think Elon Musk is working to save the planet? Because I don't. Like, that kind of person is what I'm kind of talking about. It's just get as much as I can before I die. Whoever has the most toys wins. And this kind of approach. So it's not like we're getting a lot of help from that sector, and then you have these, this whole religious thing that just, it's drives pushing for these end times. When I learned about Christian Zionism, I almost, you educated me on that about a year ago. I almost fell out of my chair. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. What's this now?
It's so batshit.
Well, I was going to say,
is running our country right now.
A good case study. If people don't know what Christian Zionism looks like, you can go back to the first Trump administration. You remember when he moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem from, I think it was in Tel Aviv, which is where most, if not all, embassies were located, because Tel Aviv is less politically a hotbed. But Jerusalem, when he moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, you remember that? They had a big festival there. All these prominent Christian evangelical American pastors, Mike Huckabee was one of them, a bunch of pastors spoke at this event when they unveiled the new embassy. And they were ecstatic, because what they saw it as, they said, America is recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, not Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. And that's historic significance from a biblical prophecy point of view. That's why there was all these evangelical pastors there at that event. That's why they were so ecstatic, because they saw it as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And Trump was the guy who did that. He did it. There's no questioning that. And they're like, thank you. God bless you, Donald Trump,
Right.
having the stone.
That's right. And if you,
And you wanted to put this here.
that's right. And that's why they're so loyal to him.
Yeah. That's the kind of stuff. Why?
Despite his lying, his dementia, his affairs, his financial crimes.
Look what he did for us. He overturned Roe versus Wade.
You could never imagine it. You could never make it up. I mean, you just can't make this shit up, right? But these people can.
Well, they're not.
And they live their lives by it. It's absolutely, it's astounding.
Like you said, they see him. I realized this when I was talking to a guy named Matthew Taylor. He wrote that book, The Violent Seize It by Force, which is really good. You'd probably benefit from reading this book. But he said, the whole Trump as Cyrus figure, that whole trope. You familiar with that? Cyrus.
I was familiar with the King David comparisons. What's the Cyrus?
That's one. So King Cyrus, if you go back to the Old Testament, he was the Persian king who allowed the Jews, the exiled Jews, to go back to the Holy Land, to the land of Israel. This is back in the Old Testament times.
Oh, right.
There's a supposed prophecy where God says of Cyrus, I'm going to raise up this figure to allow him to make this ruling to let my people go back. Even though he's, to put it in today's terms, he's a secular figure. He was not a true believer. He was not a believer in God, Yahweh. But God used him despite his flaws, despite his non-saved status, we would say today. And they look at Trump and they go, that's exactly what he is. He doesn't have to be a Christian. God is using him mightily to accomplish our dominionist ends. So things like moving the embassy to Jerusalem, overturning Roe versus Wade, that is proof positive in their view that God is using Trump. He is the Cyrus figure who's bringing about these amazing, wonderful, godly things. So they don't really care that he's not a Christian. That doesn't even matter anymore, if it ever did. And that's how they justify it.
That's right. And the idea that Christians in America, I don't know about in the rest of the world, I really don't. But I do know in America, I just happened to see a study today in an earlier meeting I was in, that a great many of the Christians in America believe they're Christians just because they show up to church. It's not about what they do. It's not about even necessarily deep belief. It's just about showing up. And it's about contributing to a Christian world or something, you know what I mean? But it really isn't even about, we gnash our teeth and rend our garments over the hypocrisy that these Christian nationalists keep displaying. But they're not hypocritical in their own mind. And that's what's so hard to get your wits around, because they're not Christians the way we think about Christians. It's a very weird thing, even to the point now. Tell me if you've heard of this, because last week I was hearing something about this where it's becoming, among some circles of Christians, it's becoming even more Old Testament-y, where Christ is too nice. Christ is just too good of a guy, right? It's just, no, I don't, I reject that, right? We got to go more old school. We got to go more Old Testament, kind of thing, because Christ is all about, forgiving your enemies and turning the other cheek and being a good guy. And that's not who I want to deal with, these immigrants. I want these fucking people dead. And if I can't kill them, I want them deported. So that's not very Christ-like, is it? Right? So we're going to reject Christ and we're going to go more Old Testament. And that, of course, is the ultimate hypocrisy of somebody calling themselves a Christian. But have you seen or heard anything about any of that? Because I was reading some stuff about that.
Christians are moving away from the Jesus, the limp-wristed, liberal, woke Jesus of the Gospels. And we want to go Old Testament on his ass sort of thing. Yes, I've heard that. There's kind of two things. One
That's right.
They're either making that move, going back to the Old Testament wrathful, angry God, because that's the God who kicks ass and, is pro-slavery and stoning people for incorrigible teens and all the rest of it. Or what they do is they're like, that we want to turn Jesus into this muscular, tough guy. That's the other move they make, is to say, yes, that isn't the Jesus that we know. The Jesus is the one in the book of Revelation who comes back and he's got a sword in his hand. He's riding a horse. He's got a tattoo on his thigh. And I've actually heard that sermon by Mark Driscoll, who was the cult leader in Mars Hill, Seattle. That's what he said. He said, I don't want to worship a Jesus that I could beat up. I want a kick-ass, muscular, tough guy who's going to kick ass. And Jesus isn't going to come back with a sword. He's going to come back with a friggin' AR-15. That's what's going to happen.
Oh my God.
And these are actual quotes from evangelical celebrity pastors. This is the Jesus that they've constructed. It's basically, if you've read that book, Jesus and John Wayne, by Kristen Kobes Dumais, that's what she talks about, that there's been this move for the last 30 or 40 years to toughen up Jesus. And, you get these tough celebrity pastors now, and they're like, no, Jesus is a kick-ass warrior, and that's what we're about now. And that fits right in with the tough immigrant, anti-LGBTQ kick-ass Jesus, because that's the tough Christian that they want people to be now. So yeah,
Right.
they've shaped Jesus into their image. Gone is the woke Jesus. There's a funny story by Russell Moore, I think he was from the Southern Baptist Convention, and he talked about a pastor who was preaching a sermon in a church where he was quoting Jesus in this sermon, and some people came up to him afterwards and they're like, hey, pastor, where are you pulling that liberal crap bullshit from? What was that about? And he's like, Jesus? That was the Gospels. And they're like, you better not be pushing that nonsense in this church. And he's like, but it's the words of Jesus. So that's how that shows the shift. We're not hearing this liberal woke nonsense. Well, that was actually just quoting allegedly the words of Jesus in the Gospels.
Right. There you go. So it's interesting how the pressure to become that way can come from all sides. It can come from the followers or the membership as well as from the leadership. It's not just, that's the codependency of these things that I stress all the time with these movements and with cults, is that it's the membership, the followers who are engaged and enabling the behavior just as much as the leadership. It's just when you get out, you're not necessarily ready to see that yet, right? You got to get through all the recovery work and the trauma and get over your own stuff before you can come around to seeing that actually you were part of the problem too, in a very, very big way. And that's very much what I see from what you were just describing there, is this shift in Jesus. It's the same kind of thing. You see these AI memes of Trump as some Schwarzenegger figure running around with, 50 calibers and stuff. And you're like, Trump, wouldn't be able to pick up a gun, much less. I mean, it's so over the top ludicrous, but this is exactly what I mean when I say they're in a delusional headspace. I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah.
It is a delusional headspace.
Yeah. Trump is a kick-ass warrior, but that's the Jesus they serve and worship. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for joining me on this show. I know we've had a couple of audio issues and whatnot, but really quickly, before everything dies, how can people find you on social media if they want to get a hold of you?
Okay, you can find me at Chris Shelton MSC on Blue Sky, on YouTube. I'm on, those are the platforms I'm basically on, social media-wise. I have a YouTube channel, and of course, you can always get my book on Scientology on Amazon.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris. We've thoroughly broken this thing down. I think there's a lot more questions still that are going to be remaining to be answered, but we will keep in touch and see how it goes. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a great day.
Beautiful.